Okay, so I do want to first introduce all of you to the One ITE committee. They're really the ones who are the architects of these model bylaws and charters. Christy, Sebastian, Kathy Leong, and Mike Salati. Certainly Kathy and Mike are available today, and they'll be available to help answer any questions or offer clarification as we go through the documents. Again, the documents are accessible in the Materials tab, and I'll be bringing them up here in a minute too. I did kind of want to start with what is the general purpose of what we were doing, and it's really an initiative under the One ITE, the broader One ITE initiative, and it's about improving consistency of governance and operations across all of ITE. And in the review of the section charter and bylaws, it's really an opportunity to bring them into alignment with ITE's constitution, as well as the new district documents that have been approved. And then, you know, it does help with the consistency of ITE because it really does bring sections into alignment with one another. Just a little bit of a process piece here. So it's the International Board, with the help of the Committee on Charters and Bylaws, that actually creates and approves the model charters and bylaws for district sections and chapters. So it's the International Board, really, who does create and approve the documents. Just a reminder, it's ITE International that charters districts and approves their bylaws. The ITE districts will be chartering the sections and approving the section bylaws. And then it's the ITE sections that charter chapters and will be approving any chapter bylaws. The ITE districts are still responsible for chartering student chapters and approving their bylaws. The student piece has come into, I've gotten a few questions related to that, and we do not have any plans in 2020 to do the student chapters. So those are going to stay put for right now. Not to say it's not going to happen at some point after that, or we take a look at them, but for right now in 2020, we are really trying to focus on the sections. We are going to be working with the chapters as well, but no student chapters in 2020. So you understand kind of the process piece. The first committee on bylaws and charters was assembled back in May of 2018 when they started developing the district documents. And really what they did was look to the language of the ITE Constitution and that framework to kind of put together those district documents. The draft section bylaws, when you see them, they are going to include some mandatory elements, and we'll go over what those elements are and how you can tell what is a mandatory element that really can't even be changed in any way. And then there are some articles that do give you a little flexibility, and we'll go over and talk about those pieces too. So there are going to be some ability to make modifications, but it is limited in the number of changes that can be done. I'm going to actually pull up the documents themselves, and we're going to go over the section bylaws to begin with. And as you can see, and you'll see this throughout the documents, in any article or section where it's grayed out, it's really intended to be a section that is mandatory and will not be changed. The only pieces that would change within this section, for example, would be the highlighted version, the highlighted portions in here. There's some important notes, and I'll go article by article through the document to kind of give you an overview of what is probably new to your section. or maybe completely different. So the first piece that's new on this area is really going to be the mission and purpose of this section, and this was a piece that was approved by the International Board, and I believe it was in January of 2018. They looked at all of the mission and purposes of the district sections and chapters and brought them into alignment with one another. And so this would be a new piece that would be included within the bylaws. And some of this is going to be reflected in the language later on throughout the bylaws. You'll see, we'll talk about, for example, what, financially supporting and coordinating with chapters within sections actually looks like or means, and what support with and mentoring of students and student chapters would mean as well. Now, there is specific language within this document that is U.S.-based that would not be, for example, in the Canadian documents when we work with the Canadian section. That language typically refers to any 501c3 or 501c6 IRS status, and so those would be removed from non-U.S. based. But I am going to kind of take this opportunity to say again, and we'll talk about it in the charters too, there is an expectation that the sections they should be incorporated, they should be, they should have filed for non-exempt tax status with the IRS, and they should be filing taxes every year. So any U.S.-based section would have this information included, and then the expectation is that we work to get you into the right order on those three pieces. When you move to the membership section, there is a question. So Kate asked, what about sections without chapters? Wouldn't change anything.
No, I don't think so. I think that the definition remains it's not applicable if you don't have a chapter.
Uh-huh. Under Article 2 membership, the key changes here are related to, any reference related to affiliates has been removed. Any reference to a member's grade has been removed. So the level of membership is an ITE international issue, and it's not discretionary by section. For example, I had a question from one of the sections about why we don't talk about life membership in here. Life membership is not a category of membership. It's not in the ITE Constitution. It's really kind of like an honor given to a person. But if you want to talk about any sort of like life membership or something like that, you could do that in a procedures or a policies document. It's not going to be addressed in the bylaws. The other piece in here is about the ability to join multiple sections. And so this really has not been addressed in the past, but we did add Section 2.2 in this document, which talks about even if you don't reside within the section, you may join the section upon payment of the appropriate dues to ITE. So you would still have to be an ITE member, but you can add additional sections onto your membership. Under the dues and assessments, this wasn't always the case in the past, but all dues, section, district, and ITE international dues are collected by ITE now. It used to be some sections could collect dues separately, but ITE is now collecting all of those dues. There is a provision in here about not being able to increase by more than 20% in any year the dues for your members without going to a vote of the section membership. And then there's another provision about special assessments need to go to a vote of the membership as well. And basically, those two pieces, if you do plan on increasing dues by more than 20% or assessing some sort of special assessment, those will always have to go to a vote of the membership. We'll see later in the document that you've been afforded, there's been recommendations to afford some more leeway on making changes to the bylaws, but those two, if you ever plan to amend in such a way as to raise dues or do the special assessment, they have to go to a vote of the membership. Let's see. So Article 4 is going to talk about your officers and board. There's a few changes within here, too, to try and bring some consistency across really all of the sections in the districts and ITE International, and that is that the terms for all offices will begin on January 1. So all terms will now begin January 1 and end on December 31st. And if your section happens to be outside of this, beginning on January 1, ending in December term, you know, it is important, and your district will begin talking to you about how to come into alignment so that when these documents do go into effect, which will be January 1, 2021, that your election cycle and the terms are all in line as well. So in addition to that piece, the article does define the elective officers at a minimum. So that means if you do have another elective officer, you can add that to this part. So we did have a question from one of the sections. They do kind of have this at-large board member, and it would be okay to have an at-large board member on your board. We're just laying out what is the at a minimum. In addition, if you do choose as a section, that secretary-treasurer position could be broken out into two. It could be secretary and treasurer. Under 4.2, we do have highlighted in there some information, and it kind of also relates to section 4.3. So I'm actually going to skip over to 4.3 and talk about that piece first. So section 4.3, to some of you, will be new. So what it does is it implements section representatives to serve on the district board. And not all districts used to have section reps. But not only in addition to all sections now having these representatives, there are some more kind of parameters around how many per section there can be, as well as the length of term. So within the district bylaws, within their section 4.3, they're actually given I'm actually going to read it so you all have it, because it is an important piece. So this is actually the what is in the district's clause for 4.3. And so what it is it says that representatives will serve from each of the sections in the district. The number of representatives is determined by the district, and it's a minimum of 1 and not more than 2 per section. The section is going to determine how the section representatives are either elected or appointed. Each section rep, their term of office cannot be any more than either 1 or 2 years. So for that section 4.3 within this document, what you will be given directions from the district about how many and the duration of the term. So that will be provided to you by the district. And then when you go back up to section 4.2, you know, in some cases, some of you may choose to, for example, have the past president be the section representative. And so you could clean up that language to just read either past president or section representative to the board. You may choose to have somebody else, another position, or it may be somebody that is elected. So 4.4 is where you will determine, are you going to use Article 5 under nomination election of officers to determine how that position is decided, or are you going to appoint somebody from the board? And again, this is a little different than in the past. There hasn't been so much around the section reps, so we do have a few questions just around that. There was a question about if there are section, not ITE, distinguished members that the section recognized by waiving their dues, can that be handled going forward? I think Jacob will have to talk about that piece so I can better understand that. Because I'm not sure if they're not paying ITE dues, it gets a little hairy, but we can talk offline on that one to better understand. There's a question, can the section rep to the district also be the past president or the president? I will say most sections are looking at the past president as the option for that person because there is a lot of responsibility. You're basically on two boards. For it to be in addition to a president, I mean, that would be very difficult. Do we have the ability to add additional positions as voting members? And yes, you do. Again, we're really just trying to kind of give you what is kind of the model of the minimum. But if you do have additional people that you want to add, you can do that. All right, moving on. So Article 5, and you'll notice Article 5 is not grayed out. And neither are most of the sections. There's one section within Article 5 that cannot change, and that's really related to the terms beginning January 1 and expiring on December 31st. So Article 5, what we're presenting to you is what we think is a good model to follow. But we do understand that there may be some modifications done by the section to kind of tailor it to what you need. And you do have a little latitude within here on making sure that it is a process that works for you. Now, I would ask, you know, if you do have specific questions or something that's really kind of out of the ordinary that you do related to nomination elections, to kind of bring it up to either your district, or you can send me questions too, because, you know, again, we're trying to present what we think is the model. We don't want to go too far off, but we also want to understand what your needs are, and hopefully we can figure out a compromise to make it work. But again, this is intended to be the model, and you do have some latitude to make it work for you. When we get to Article 6 and we're talking about government, you know, we're providing information on the role of the president at the meetings. There's information in here about establishing a quorum. There's also information about suggesting that sections look to establish a section administrator position. While it's not mandatory language, you know, this is definitely the recommendation that we have, especially with, you know, the turnover year after year on the section boards. It's really helpful if you can have an administrator position to maintain those important documents that need to be updated every year. A lot of section administrators have also kind of taken on the position of the holder of the bank account, because we know that can be a very difficult process to have to change every year, and so it's been helpful to them to establish that one person who is consistent. There is some information in here about the membership petitioning the board to either remove somebody from office or initiate a vote to determine an action that the board has put in place that it should be rescinded. Those are pretty standard from other documents that we've had in place, and the percentages are also the recommendations. They can technically be changed, but again, you know, that is what has been kind of tested throughout the districts and kind of the recommendation of the committee. The other piece on here too, section 6.8, is really about the section board should establish and maintain a procedures manual. And that is an important piece that we found was not always the case at the district level. It certainly should be also in place at the section level. And what it does is it kind of gives you a little latitude of having some of your information, you know, does it raise to the level of needing to be in the bylaws? And if it doesn't, then you would have it in your procedures manual. When we get into the meeting section, there is the recommendation. You do have to have an organizational meeting. There's the highlighted portion about committees. Dependent upon the size of your section, you may or may not have a lot of committees. And then in addition, there is the provision that there shall be a minimum of 2 meetings of the section each year. That's an important piece as well. There is a question here about, can the board initiate action to remove a board member? And I don't think technically there's a provision for the board to initiate it. It technically has to come from the membership. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to look at that piece, Al. All right. Article 8 is an interesting portion as well. And Article 8 is really about the sections and chapters. So sections can establish chapters, and that has always been the case. And so the section board can issue charters establishing chapters. You know, and what can happen is it's really upon the written request of voting members residing in a proposed chapter area. There used to be a requirement of a minimum of 8 people, and the committee decided to drop that minimum. It seemed a little arbitrary when establishing a chapter, and so that piece was dropped. But the section does have the ability to either approve or not approve any proposal like that comes into them. Now, 8.2 does reflect on the purpose and mission of the section, and it states the section shall financially support and coordinate with any chapters established within this area. And this is new, and I was going to ask Jeff Pignati to actually give a little background and information on the intent of this section.
So if you go back to the very beginnings of the One ITE initiative, it really started with the board at its, I think it was at Colleen's January 2018 board meeting, looking at a map of all of the district's sections and chapters, looking at them geographically. And one of the things that stood out, and one of the questions they immediately asked was, well, why is it that some districts have sections and some have chapters, and there's kind of a mishmash of the use of section and chapter? What's the difference? And at that time, when you looked at the definition of a section and the definition of a chapter, they were virtually identical. And so probably shouldn't have been surprising that we ended up across ITE with sections and chapters that pretty much were doing the same thing, but called different things and operating under slightly different operating styles and approaches. And so based on that, when the board then began to move forward with this idea of creating more consistent structure within the organization, they started, before they did anything else, was writing new definitions for what district sections and chapters were and what their roles and responsibilities were. And you see that today in the district charter at the beginning is a very clear, in the bylaws, a very clear definition of what the role of a district is. And you saw at the beginning of the document that Colleen showed here, the definition of what the role of a section is. And a similar one has been written for a chapter. And the way that the board defined it is that the primary entity is the section. And as Colleen just indicated, the section may establish, doesn't have to, but may decide to establish chapters within its boundaries. And the chapter is a subsidiary of the section now. It is not on the same level. It is not a companion to the section. It is a supporting element of the section. And there were some models out there that exist today along those lines. I think the one that we referred to throughout the process is in Arizona, where we have an Arizona section and we have a Southern Arizona chapter. And I think that's right. Is it right. Arizona? Right. And I think we have some others as well, but that's a good example where the distance between where most of the members in Arizona meet, which is in the Phoenix area, and where those in Southern Arizona, more I think in the Tucson or Southern area meet, is too far for them to regularly meet together. So, and there's enough of them in the Tucson or Southern Arizona area to warrant establishment of a chapter. So the chapter exists, but it's all within this boundary and responsibility of the section. And so that's really where Section 8.2 came from, is if you're going to have a chapter, and that chapter is going to be part of your section, and the members of the chapter are section members, and the only entity that can collect dues is the section, then the section has a responsibility to support financially and coordinate with any chapters that exist within its area. And should care about the health of the chapter, should care about the ability of the chapter to carry out its activities in support of that section. So that's really the sort of the genesis of this Section 8.2 and the intent of 8.2. And the hope, I think, is that the chapter definition now can allow for chapters to form more easily in these more remote areas or in where there's critical mass of members, and might be a place that might incubate, ultimately may grow to a new section over a long period of time. And that the chapter can operate with a less rigid structure and allow, more easily members to begin to get together and form with the consent and oversight of the section. So it's clear that the section has the ability to establish a charter for a chapter and has the ability to revoke that charter if necessary. So it is really an entity of the section. All
right, so we do have some questions on this. specifically. So there was a question about just confirm that 8.2 does not prevent chapters from having a bank account. And no, I mean, a chapter would still be able to have a bank account. Now, chapters moving forward cannot collect dues, but they can still host luncheons or, you know, small gatherings amongst themselves. So they can definitely have a bank account. And there's a question too, should there be a threshold for what percentage of voting members need to request the establishment of a chapter, or does it only take a few members? I mean, this, and the committee members can chime in here too, you know, this is one that we talked a lot about as a committee. So honestly, the threshold to create a section is actually established in the ITE Constitution, and it's a minimum of 8 voting members, okay? And that traditionally has always been what we've had in place for establishing a chapter as well. But I think the committee kind of felt like it was a little bit arbitrary. And the truth is, the section leadership has the ability to either approve or not approve the formation of the chapter. Did anybody else have anything to share on that?
Colleen, you kind of said it. This is Mike Salati. I mean, we had, as you said, a lot of discussion about it, and it was just decided that rather than put some kind of another arbitrary number on top of the 8 that seem to appear many times on when a section could be created and then maybe a chapter, we just felt let's keep it loose, because at the end of the day, it's really up to the section to decide whether it's just a few members or many members who want to start a chapter. It's really up to the section to see if that's justifiable or viable. And so we just kept it loose that way.
Right. So we do have another question about confirm that a chapter may or may not have an elected board. And the committee and the board has reviewed the chapter charters. They have not done a thorough review on bylaws yet, but I mean, I think it is going to be pretty loose about how they have to be established or not. So I do think there's going to be some leeway there. I will say, I think the intent is, you know, for these chapters to kind of be this opportunity for, you know, a smaller group of members, geographically located, to be able to get together. But, you know, over time, we also want to encourage so that if that chapter grows to a level of having very organized governance and committees, et cetera, they really should elevate to a section.
Or in between, may have an elected board as it grows. So I think, as Colleen said, we don't want to put too much formality in place where it's such a big hurdle to get a chapter started. But yet we also want to create room if that chapter does get started and has a significant number of members and feels like it would benefit from having an elected board and more structure, that is allowable as well. So it is provide a fair amount of latitude to allow chapters to begin and to grow over time.
Right. I do want to point out 8.3. So the sections shall support and coordinate with any student chapters established within its area. You know, back on what I said at the beginning, so the districts are still going to be the ones to charter and approve bylaws for student chapters. And there's a question about that, why that is the case. And honestly, it's because there are so many student chapters that administratively and with all of the historical documents, it makes a lot more sense for the district to just manage that process. And it's a lot easier for IT International as well to work through the district just on the administrative side of those documents with the student chapters. But 8.3 is important because what we are asking the sections to do, which is already happening in a lot of sections, but not all, but we are asking you to support and coordinate with your student chapters within your area. And so that means having student liaisons who are, actively touching base with the students and certainly encouraging the students to participate in your events as well as the section participating in the student events as well. All right, so then we get into Article 9, voting and voter eligibility. These sections, they really are pretty standard provisions that have existed in previous bylaws. I don't think that in every section bylaw there was the provision for electronic balloting, which is now universally accepted. So there is information in here on that. But for the most part, these have been pretty standard provisions. If you have any specific questions related to this section, we're happy to look at it. And then Article 10, the amendments, and I alluded to it prior. There are some important modifications that have been done in this area. So again, any increase of dues over 25% or if you want to do a special assessment onto the membership, those have to go to a vote of the membership. But really any other amendment can be either voted on and agreed upon by the section board, or the board can choose at their discretion to put it out to a vote of the membership. And what that does, it just gives the board a little bit more, latitude in being able to, keep the bylaws updated. But at the same time, the reality is so much of the bylaws now are in alignment and not able to be modified too much, that you shouldn't be making a lot of modifications. So that's the bylaw piece. I was going to touch on the charter as well, and I do have a question here from Daleen. Says there's nowhere in here the bylaws that indicates the date on which they were adopted or for a signature by the district president. And yeah, we can definitely add that portion at the end, like the charter. The charter has that provision at the end. So within the charter, a lot of what's in the charter is, mandated language that is in the bylaws. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, except to point out key points. So number one, within Article 1, so these section charters will become effective January 1, 2021. And again, it's your district that's actually going to be issuing them. Under the area and purpose, that is where the district will designate the boundaries of the section. The updated mission and purpose is also included within this area. There's a lot more language within the charter about being of both nonprofit status and IRS recognized, plus organized as a nonprofit incorporation. So for U.S.-based sections, all of that language would still be included, and that's all through 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, all of that, which is a lot of standard language. Now, one of the questions I did get prior is, what if our state does have a requirement that within the charter something very specific be included, in which case please make that information available to me. It may make sense for it to be universally adopted, and we can either add it here, or maybe it's only applicable to whatever state you are in. So the key membership follows exactly to what the bylaws are. Article 4 actually gives the section board the authority to draft new bylaws, which is what you'll be doing with the other document in accordance with the updated charter. And the only other piece that is different that we haven't really talked about, 5.2, 5.3 talks about some of the provisions in 8. But when you get to Article 6, there is some added language about, it gives direction on developing relationships between kind of ITE, the district, and the sections. So, you know, sections are encouraged to develop relationships with other not-for-profit associations at the same level in which the section operates, to do meetings, programs for ITE members. So sections should not be entering into any formal partnerships or agreements with either national or international organizations without the consent from ITE. And that is a new provision that has not been in there previously. So I do have some more questions here. The question, does the district board need to approve amendments to the section bylaws? And I mean, I think technically the district board, I think technically they should get copied on amendments to the bylaws and have the authority to approve or deny them. And maybe we need to look at and make sure that is clearly defined, how that works. We have another question. If a charter were to rise to a section with the chapter, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. If a chapter were to rise to a section, would the section within which that chapter had been located require a brand new charter? How would that process work? Yes. So any chapter that's going to elevate, and we're going to have a number that are elevating next year from chapter level to section, but if it were to happen in the future as well, they would have to be rechartered and do new bylaws as well. Somebody is very pleased with the bylaws. Thank you. And then there's a statement, Section 4.7 needs to make district board approval more clear. And we will look at that portion to make sure that it does make sense for everybody. So with that, I do want to, you know, encourage all of you to provide any feedback that you have. I think there's a few questions. I'm going to go back through the chat and just make sure I got all the questions. I think there's a few that I may have left hanging, not on purpose, but I did want to bring up this timeline because this is kind of the crucial piece here. So as of today, we you know, are going through this review of the model documents. We would ask, you know, if you have any feedback or questions or anything to certainly provide that to either your district or you can send those to me as well. We really do get back to all of the comments that are and questions that are asked. And we appreciate them as well. They've helped us develop really much better documents than we've had in the past. So, but between now and probably, you know, probably mid-October, you know, we do want to try and get any and all of those comments and that feedback. And so what will be put in front of the International Board in November are final versions of these documents, and the board will review and hopefully approve them for distribution. And then ITE will distribute the documents to the districts. So ITE is going to be working very closely with our districts to manage this process. we're going to be very, what I'll be doing is reaching out directly to all of the districts really in the next few weeks to start to establish the timelines that will work for you, because we will need the sections to actually modify the model bylaws for them, and then the districts are going to need to approve any bylaws by June 30th, 2020, so that a final review through ITE and the International Board can take place. I did have a question. Suggest moving forward the section bylaws approval because if multiple drafts occurs, timing is suddenly tight for reaching the final by June 30. I mean, the next time the board meets is in November, and so that is, you know, when the next approval does take place. I will be reaching out again, though, and working through the districts to kind of organize and establish how to move forward with each of them to try and move this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can distribute the documents to the districts, you know, earlier than January. I mean, the board meeting will be at the beginning of November, so I would expect, you know, probably by Thanksgiving or thereabouts, we'll be able to, unless there's major changes that come out of the board meeting, we'll be able to move those forward. So that will accelerate it a little bit. And, you know, we would hope between that kind of, you know, say beginning of December and June 30th, it provides sufficient time for the districts to coordinate with the sections to develop. If there needs to be a draft and review process, that can take place in those 6 or 7 month time period. And we can get, you know, through all the sections to international by the beginning of July 2020.
So really, the next steps are really about, you know, if you do have questions, comments, or feedback that you want to be looked at, to please either work through your district leadership or you can send those directly to me. And again, the International Board is planning to hopefully approve these in November. And as Jeff said, I mean, between that November and January date, I mean, we'll definitely get the documents back out to you. And the goal is that the rechartering and all of the bylaws are approved by June 30th. And we realize that is going to be tough. There was a comment earlier that I did not get to that was about how we send the documents and being very clear about what areas can be changed and won't be changed. And what we'll do is when we send out the documents, we'll kind of send out a companion piece that'll be very clear about areas that you can change and what you can't. For the most part, anything that is shaded, if a header is shaded, it's really not changeable unless there's a highlighted portion within it. But we will be very clear about that moving forward. This is, it may be easier for the districts to approve charters permitting 2/3 board approval of bylaws earlier in the process. And I agree. I mean, I think the districts will be able to issue the charters very early on in the process. And again, my plan is to work through the districts on that. So for the most part, I'll be able to send to them a document that is filled out with the section information as well as the geographical area. Those are really the only two areas of that document that could be modified. So I don't see that as being difficult. So under our current bylaws, bylaw changes need to be approved. So by a vote of the membership. It is important to understand the way that we've written the charter is such that it does give the district leadership the ability to create bylaws without having to go to a vote of the membership. So
in sections.
Yes.
I don't know if that was referring to a section, not a district.
we would not have approved for changes until September 2020. So under our current bylaws, bylaw changes need to be approved by membership vote.
It was the same as we did with the districts, so
Right.
that basically what the International Board has done is given districts and now sections the authority to change and create new bylaws without regard to your existing bylaws requiring votes
Right.
of membership. So whether it was a district or the section board,
Yes.
you have the authority to make changes and draft new bylaws.
Right. And that provision is in the charter. So, and it is important to note, so this document is not going to go to a vote of the membership. You guys are going to put it together. It is going to become effective January 1, along with your new charter, January 1, 2021. There's a question about anybody doing a comparison of current charter and bylaws with this, and that I cannot answer, but I don't know if it is necessary. I mean, these are the model documents moving forward, and we did try to create a model that will work for your section and allow you a little latitude, especially in the nominations and elections process.
I mean, certainly in this time period, where we have open for comments, if you want to compare the model versus what you have today and see if there are any provisions that you think this group left out and should be raised, I think that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
We hope that
Absolutely.
that the board and Colleen, the group that was working on this, was able to create models that hit all of the important elements that exist. But as we went through the district process, we found some things, or the district administrators and others found some things that we had missed in the process, and those helped strengthen the final version of the district charter and bylaws. So I think it's certainly possible, maybe even probable, that there will be some things brought forward. And so if you want to do that comparison at your local level, that certainly makes sense. And to send in any comments on any questions or issues you run into.
Right. So Tom brought up a point. Maybe other provisions that are currently in the bylaws will move to the procedures manual, and that makes sense. Now this says, unless the district approves new charter, our section can't approve bylaws until 2020 annual meeting in September. And I mean, Al, so my plan is to work with all the districts on the timeline. So we'll have to talk separately about that to kind of understand why. But I will say again, it does not have to go to a vote of the membership for the bylaws to be updated. So that should help with that piece of the process. Yeah, so there's a question, should the gray sections never be amended? And that is correct. And you're right, 90% of the document is gray. There are some highlighted portions within the gray that would give you a little leeway, but really beyond it's Article 5, the nominations, elections, there's not a lot of variability. There's a question, do you think it's necessary that someone should be serving IT as a committee member before, at the section level, before they have to be elected to the board? And again, no, I don't think, I don't know that that is a provision in there, but again, that nomination election piece is pretty open to your being able to modify it. But if you're just asking as should that be the case, I don't know that every section actually has that luxury. If people want to serve, they typically will take people to serve and run in board positions. There's no grade sections in the charter. So the charter, once it's issued to you, you never change the charter. So I mean, the charter really is at the discretion of the district and really the international board. So the charter never changes. It is an unamendable document unless, you know, the district or the international board happens to make a change in some way down in the future. But none of that, that entire document is not going to change without a reissued charter. So, all right. There will be a recording available, so we'll push it out on e-community once we get that. Usually it's a turnaround within 24, 48 hours. And again, you know, if there are questions, definitely send us your thoughts. And we're happy to look at it and certainly get back to you. So I want to thank everybody for being here today, and definitely look forward to working with y'all to get this done in 2020. So thank you very much.